They figured they'd snatched a lamb, an easy prize from a lone ranch, and Cyrus Vane's men were already tasting the ransom money. Easy pickings, one of them rasped, his voice coarse in the flickering firelight of their desolate canyon hideout. He called her girl, a piece of currency. But Abigail Hayes, bound loosely in the darkest corner, wasn't mulling over her terror. She was cataloging their weapons, their carelessness, their arrogance. The girl they saw, the one they dismissed, was a phantom. The truth of her, forged in secret by a warrior father who understood the savage heart of the frontier, was a reckoning about to be unleashed. These outlaws believed they held a rancher's daughter. They would soon learn they'd trapped a storm. Life on the Hayes spread, a patch of stubborn green carved into the rugged expanse near Cottonwood Bend, was a daily lesson in vigilance. Marcus Hayes, Abigail's father, was a man etched by hardship, his quiet strength a bulwark against the untamed world. He'd seen the West's smiling deceptions and its brutal truths. So, while Abigail learned the rhythm of ranch chores, the scent of turned earth in the garden, the heft of an axe splitting firewood, the lowing of cattle at dusk, her true schooling was far more demanding, far more silent. From her earliest years, Marcus hadn't just taught her to ride and shoot. He taught her to see. A displaced pebble, the faintest shimmer of bent grass, the way a shadow fell differently. These were letters in a language of survival. "The earth never lies, Abby," he'd murmur, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "You just have to listen to its whispers." Her afternoons were less about household tasks and more about stalking deer through dense willow thickets until her movements were as fluid as water, her breath as controlled as the hawk's glide. She learned to read the subtle shifts in the wind, the alarm calls of unseen birds. And then there was the other training, the kind born from Marcus's unmentioned past, a past that spoke of desperate fights and close-quarter survival. He taught her the cold logic of a knife, not just for dressing game, but as an extension of her will. He drilled her in throws and holds, how to use an attacker's momentum against them, how to break free, how to fight when trapped, her small, agile frame learning to generate surprising power. He'd watch her practice, disarming a crudely made dummy, his expression a mixture of pride and a deep, aching sadness. "I pray you never need this, child," he'd say, his voice rough. "But this land demands a harsh respect, and I'd rather its lessons came from me." Abigail absorbed it all with a grave intensity that belied her youth. Her natural quietness, often mistaken for timidity by the townsfolk in Cottonwood Bend, was in truth a focused observation. Her eyes, the same clear gray as her father's, were always scanning, assessing. She felt the unspoken tension in Marcus's easy stance, the way his hand always knew the proximity of his worn peacemaker. Their small cabin, built with thick logs and strategically placed windows, was a fortress in miniature. Peace, she understood, wasn't a gift in these lands. It was a hard one, daily victory. The first ominous notes of trouble arrived like a shift in the wind, a subtle darkening on the horizon. Riders, strangers with hard faces and watchful eyes, began to ghost through the territory. They bypassed Cottonwood Bend, preferring the desolate solace of the northern canyons. Old Man Hemlock, his general store the town's primary source of news and goods, warned Marcus during a supply run. "They got a lean and hungry look, Marcus. Best be wary." Marcus merely nodded, his gaze already assessing distant ridgelines. But it was Abigail, checking a remote fence line bordering a dry wash, who found the first concrete sign. A single, deep hoof print from a heavy, shod horse, days old but deliberately placed in a sheltered spot, too close to their home pasture for a casual passerby. That evening, as the sky bled into bruised purples, she observed a lone rider, a dark silhouette against the fading light, watching their ranch from a far-off bluff for a long, disquieting period before melting back into the dusk. She reported her findings to Marcus, her voice calm, her details precise. His weathered face grew taut, the lines around his eyes deepening. He offered few words, but that night, the rhythmic rasp of him cleaning his Winchester filled their small cabin, and the heavy ammunition box was moved to a more accessible spot. "Could be nothing, Abby," he muttered, the words carrying little conviction. "Or it could be the coyote sizing up the lamb." A palpable tension settled over the Hayes ranch, an invisible tightening of their already careful world. The coyote, they would soon learn, answered to the name Cyrus Vane, a man whose cold reputation preceded him like a winter chill, his silver-adorned colt a harbinger of his deadly intent. The storm that Cyrus Vane represented broke, first not upon the Hayes ranch, but several miles east, at the isolated Miller Way station. Vane and his half-dozen riders struck with the brutal efficiency of a hawk hitting a dove. They plundered coin, fresh mounts, and vital supplies, leaving behind 2 lifeless forms and a scene of chilling violence. News of the slaughter, carried by a stagecoach driver whose face was still pale with terror, rippled through Cottonwood Bend like a fever. The usual hum of the small settlement was replaced by hushed, fearful whispers and the bluster of men who knew, deep down, they were ill-equipped to face such ruthlessness. Marcus received the news with a grim tightening of his lips. At Hemlock's, he purchased more cartridges than usual, his jaw set. Back at their ranch, the quiet preparations intensified. Shutters were tested, the barn door reinforced. Abigail, her movements economical and precise, moved through her training drills with a heightened focus. The soft thud of her bare feet on the packed earth as she practiced evasive maneuvers, the whisper of her knife clearing its sheath, the sharp crack of her rifle finding its mark on distant targets. These sounds wove a new layer into the fabric of their days. There was no outward sign of fear in her, only a sharpened readiness. Her father had armed her for possibilities. Now, one such possibility, led by a man with eyes like chips of winter ice, rode the nearby range. During a swift trip into Cottonwood Bend for essentials, she saw the anxiety etched on the faces of the townsfolk. She heard the fleeting, brave talk of forming a posse, then the inevitable, deflating silence as the true nature of Vane's hardened gang settled into their thoughts. Some murmured that Vane sought bigger prizes, that a small ranch like theirs would escape his notice. Abigail knew the calculations of predators were different. They tested weaknesses. They probed for easy targets. While others offered prayers for deliverance, Abigail honed the edge of her father's spare hunting blade until it gleamed like a captured moonbeam. Prayer had its place, Marcus had taught, but it was best accompanied by a steady hand and a clear mind. Her observations sharpened further. She noted which of Vane's men, described by the stage driver, seemed most jittery. How Vane himself was said to command with icy disdain. Every scrap of information was a piece of a dangerous puzzle. Cyrus Vane, emboldened by the lack of resistance after the Miller Way station, decided his scouts had been accurate. The Hayes ranch, an old man, a girl, decent stock, isolated, looked like an easy mark. A quick snatch, a swift ransom. Vane, a man who valued brutal efficiency above all, saw no complications. The girl was leverage, nothing more. The thought that she herself might pose a threat never crossed the threshold of his arrogant mind. Such possibilities were beneath his notice. The assault came with the false innocence of dawn, the land still cloaked in gray mist. Vane, ever cunning, orchestrated a diversion. 2 of his men ignited a patch of dry brush far to the east, the rising smoke a calculated lure. Marcus, his senses always alert, spotted it. "Stay put, Abby," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. "Keep that rifle aimed. Bar the door tight." He rode out cautious, but the threat to his precious grazing land pulled at him. It was the precise vulnerability Vane had anticipated. As Marcus topped a low rise, 2 more of Vane's gang materialized from the chaparral. The attack was sudden, vicious. A rifle but connected with Marcus's head, sending him crashing from his saddle, stars exploding behind his eyes. They didn't kill him. A dead rancher paid no ransoms. But they left him groaning, a dark stain spreading in the dust. Back at the cabin, Abigail heard the muffled thud, the single, sharp cry abruptly cut off. A blade of ice pierced her heart. Her training surged to the forefront. No panic. She moved to the narrow window, her rifle already shouldered, peering through the slit. She saw them then. 3 riders, Vane leading, galloping directly towards the cabin. Too many, too fast. A direct defense from within, alone, was a death sentence. The door splintered inwards before she could secure the heavy bar. Cyrus Vane filled the doorway, his silver-inlaid pistol a dull gleam in the dim light. "Well now, little lady," he drawled, his smile chilling. "Looks like your pa had himself a little tumble." 2 of his men, smelling of horse sweat and stale violence, lunged for her. Abigail didn't resist, not then. She allowed her body to go limp, her eyes wide, mimicking the terror they expected. It was a mask. Beneath it, her mind was a razor, assessing. 3 here, at least 2 more who'd dealt with her father. Their weapons, their horses, the casual brutality in their movements as they dragged her outside and thrust her onto a waiting mount. Her hands were bound carelessly in front, more an insult than a true restraint. Their laughter was harsh, confident. Abigail feigned a stumble, a gasp of distress. Her fear was a cold knot in her belly, but it was overlaid by a diamond-hard focus. She was already searching for their first mistake. The ride was brutal, pushing north, away from any hope of rescue, towards the unforgiving, broken canyons. The hideout was a natural fortress, a rock-choked basin accessible only by a treacherous, winding path. Vane's men, steeped in arrogance and the easy victory, grew lax. They'd handled frightened women before. Tears and pleas were the currency of such encounters. Abigail offered silence. She sat where they'd dumped her, near the smoldering remains of a fire, her head bowed, the picture of defeat. But through the curtain of her tangled hair, her eyes were relentless. She marked the slovenly sentry at the canyon's narrow mouth, the way the others swigged whiskey and squabbled over past loot, their vigilance dissolving with each pull from the bottle. 5 of them, including Vane. Her father's voice, a calm echo in the turmoil. "Patience, Abby. A true hunter waits for the perfect error." The hours bled away. The sun abandoned the canyon, leaving it to the creeping chill and long, dancing shadows. Warmed by stolen liquor and self-assurance, most of the outlaws had rolled into their blankets. One man, a hulking brute named Pike, was tasked with guarding her. He slumped against a boulder, his attention divided between Abigail and his dwindling bottle. Her hands, tied with a clumsy square knot, had been a subtle project for hours. Marcus had shown her how most men who relied on ropes rarely understood their weaknesses. These men were sloppy. A sliver of sharp flint, almost swallowed by the dirt beside her, became her quiet ally. She'd clocked it hours before. Feigning shivers, she had shifted, millimeter by millimeter, until her bound fingers brushed against its edge. With infinite care, she began to braid the hemp fibers. Pike snorted in his drunken doze, oblivious. One strand parted, then another. Her hands came free. She remained motionless for a long count, allowing the prickling sensation of returning blood to subside, her breathing a slow, deliberate rhythm. Pike was the first obstacle, positioned between her and the canyon entrance, where the horses were tethered, and the careless sentry presumably slouched. She rose like smoke, her bare feet finding purchase on the uneven ground with a certainty born of endless practice. Pike muttered, shifted, but his stupor held. She needed a weapon. Near a discarded saddlebag, not 10 feet from the sleeping outlaw, lay a hunting knife. The crawl towards it was an agony of slowness, each dislodged pebble a potential thunderclap. Her fingers finally closed around the worn wooden hilt. It felt like an old friend. The sentry at the canyon mouth, a youth named Cletus, was indeed negligent. He leaned against a towering rock, lost in contemplation of the stars, his rifle resting beside him. He never sensed Abigail's approach, a whisper in the darkness. A forearm, hard as seasoned oak, slammed across his throat, cutting off his air supply, her other hand instantly sealing his mouth. His eyes bulged with a silent, horrified question. A brief, convulsive struggle. Then he went limp. Abigail eased him to the ground, swiftly taking his rifle and pistol. Strips torn from his own bandana served as a gag and bonds. One down. Pike, still snoring by the dying fire, was next. He was larger, and any sound would bring the others. She glided back towards the embers. The whiskey bottle lay empty beside him. She recalled a specific lesson from Marcus, a nerve cluster, struck with precise force. Risky, but silent. Taking a steadying breath, she positioned herself, then delivered the swift, disabling blow. Pike emitted a choked gasp, his eyes flying open in a moment of dazed confusion before he collapsed, unconscious. She secured him quickly. 2 down. The odds were shifting. The remaining 3, Vane among them, slept soundly in a crude, open-faced lean-to. The hunter was now armed, and the game had changed. Cyrus Vane awoke to an unnatural silence. The campfire had dwindled to a faint, pulsing glow, and the usual nocturnal chorus of his men, the snores, the coughs, the muttered curses, was eerily absent. A cold premonition slithered down his spine. His hand instinctively sought the reassuring curve of his silver-inlaid pistol. He rose with fluid quietness, peering out from the lean-to. 2 of his men, usually close by, were missing. Pike, assigned to the girl, was also gone. And the girl's space was empty. A low snarl escaped Vane's lips. He prodded the 2 remaining sleepers awake with the toe of his boot. "Get up," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "Something's wrong. The girl is gone, and Pike and Cletus are nowhere to be found." The men, still mired in sleep, scrambled for their weapons, their eyes wide and alarmed in the gloom. "She couldn't have," one began, his voice faltering as the chilling implication of 3 missing men and an escaped captive took root. Abigail, concealed amongst the jagged rocks high above them, watched, listened. Cletus's rifle felt balanced and familiar in her hands. His pistol was secure in her waistband, the knife within easy reach. The broken terrain was now her strongest ally. Marcus had taught her to become one with the shadows, to use every dip and crevice. "Spread out, find her," Vane commanded, his voice tight with a volatile mix of rage and a dawning, deeply unwelcome understanding that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. She can't have gotten far. But Abigail had no intention of merely escaping. She intended to finish this. As one of the outlaws, a twitchy man named Shorty, edged away from the dying fire's faint circle of light, Abigail sighted down the rifle barrel. She wasn't aiming for a kill, not immediately. A wounded enemy, her father had taught, could be a greater impediment than a dead one. The rifle's report shattered the canyon silence. Shorty screamed, a high, thin sound, clutching his thigh as he crumpled to the ground. "Damn it to hell, she's armed." The last outlaw, a grizzled hardcase called Boone, bellowed, lunging for the scant cover of a cluster of boulders. Vane cursed, his gaze raking the rocks above, a desperate search for any sign of movement. The hunter had become the hunted. Abigail melted back, changing her position with silent agility, crawling along a narrow, shadowed ledge. She could hear Vane's frustrated shouts, his attempts to rally his disintegrating posse. She waited, her patience a cold, hard thing. Boone, driven by panic, decided to risk a dash, perhaps hoping to flank her or simply to flee. He bolted from his cover. Abigail was ready. A second shot echoed through the canyon. Boone cried out, his own weapon spinning from his grasp as the bullet struck his shoulder, throwing him off balance. He collapsed, a whimpering heap. Only Vane remained. He was shrewder, more controlled than his men. He stayed low, moving with a predator's caution, using the rocks and shadows. But Abigail had been born to this landscape. She understood its deceptions, its hidden pathways. She caught a subtle movement, the briefest glint of Vane's pistol barrel. He was attempting to circle around, to get above her. A grim smile touched her lips. It was a textbook maneuver, one Marcus had drilled into her. She allowed him to draw closer, to feel a sliver of returning confidence. Then, just as he exposed himself for a heartbeat. Moving between two towering pinnacles of rock, she didn't fire. Instead, with a precisely aimed kick, she dislodged a cascade of loose stones and screed from the ledge above him. It wasn't a landslide, but it was enough to startle him, to make him falter. In that instant of broken rhythm, Abigail descended from her perch like a striking hawk, pistol now in her hand. Vane recovered with surprising speed, spinning, his pistol already rising. But Abigail's reflexes, honed by years of relentless practice, were quicker. Her shot was not aimed to kill, but to disarm. The heavy bullet slammed into his gun hand. The silver-inlaid pistol, his pride, clattered uselessly onto the stony ground as Vane let out a roar of pure agony and disbelief. He stared at her, his face a mask of contorted fury. This slip of a girl. He lunged, driven by pain and outrage, attempting to overpower her through sheer brute force. But she moved like water, sidestepping his clumsy charge, and brought the heavy barrel of the captured rifle up in a swift, brutal arc. The steel met his temple with a sickening thud. Vane staggered, his eyes losing focus. Before he could even begin to fall, she was on him, efficiently stripping him of any concealed weapons, her hands tying the knots with a chilling expertise, using their own ropes against them. She stood then, her chest aching with each ragged breath, her clothes torn and stained, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. The desolate hideout was quiet now, save for the pained groans of defeated men. Abigail Hayes, the rancher's daughter, surveyed the scene, the captured rifle still clutched tightly in her grip. Her expression was one of cold, hard-won, exhausted triumph. It was in that moment she heard it, the distinct sound of a single horse, ridden fast and with purpose, approaching the canyon entrance. Her head snapped up, a mixture of hope and renewed tension in her eyes. Marcus Hayes, his head bandaged crudely, every muscle screaming in protest, had tracked them with a father's desperate resolve. The fear for Abigail had been a burning coal in his chest, eclipsing his own considerable pain. He'd found the site of his ambush, read the signs of their hasty departure. He had pushed his horse, and himself, beyond endurance. Reaching the narrow throat of the canyon, he saw the bound and gagged sentry. His heart hammered against his ribs. He dismounted, rifle at the ready, bracing for a bloody confrontation. Instead, he found his daughter, standing, whole, dominating a scene of absolute defeat. He stopped, the air leaving his lungs in a ragged gasp. For a long, stunned moment, he simply absorbed the sight. Abigail, her small frame radiating an undeniable power, surrounded by the broken remnants of Vane's gang. The burning coal of fear in his chest was suddenly extinguished, replaced by a surge of fierce, overwhelming pride that stung his weary eyes. He took a hesitant step forward. "Abby," he managed, his voice hoarse. She turned, and the icy resolve in her eyes softened, just for an instant, as she saw him. Pa. He didn't need to ask. The story was etched in the dust, in the splatters of blood, in the dumbfounded, pain-filled expressions of Cyrus Vane and his men. He closed the distance and pulled her into a rough, fierce embrace, burying his face in her grime-streaked hair, the scent of gunpowder and her own unwavering spirit filling his senses. "You all right, child?" he asked, the words thick with emotion. She nodded against his shoulder, a single, delayed shudder finally running through her. "I'm all right, Pa." They learned their lesson. Marcus looked down at the bound outlaws, his expression turning to granite. The nearest U.S. Marshal was a hard 2-day ride. Cottonwood Bend, however, possessed a sturdy oak at the edge of town, one that had witnessed rough frontier justice more than once. The return of Marcus and Abigail Hayes to Cottonwood Bend, calmly leading 5 securely trussed and thoroughly demoralized outlaws, including the infamous Cyrus Vane, sent a shockwave through the small settlement. Eyewitness accounts spread like wildfire, embellished with each telling, but the core truth was undeniable. Abigail Hayes, the quiet girl from the isolated ranch, had done the unthinkable. The story, slowly pieced together from Marcus's understated account and the irrefutable evidence of the subdued gang transformed her image entirely. She was no longer just a rancher's daughter. She was Abigail, the girl who had faced down hardened killers and emerged victorious. A profound respect, bordering on awe, settled upon the community. Abigail, true to her nature, sought to return to the familiar rhythms of her life. Yet, something had irrevocably shifted. The way people looked at her now held a new deference, their greetings imbued with a respect that had not been there before. She didn't seek the attention, but she bore it with a quiet dignity. A new, undeniable strength radiated from her, a calm certainty that had been forged in fire. Her father observed her with a deep, unspoken satisfaction. His harsh lessons had borne fruit. His daughter was not merely a survivor, she was a protector. The legend of Abigail Hayes and the outfoxed outlaws became a cornerstone of Cottonwood Bend's lore, a tale told and retold around campfires and in Hemlock's store. It served as a stark reminder that the frontier demanded resilience and courage from all its inhabitants, regardless of age or appearance. And sometimes, the greatest danger lay not in underestimating the wolf at the door, but in misjudging the quiet strength of the lamb who had been secretly trained to guard the fold. Peace on the Hayes ranch remained a vigilant endeavor, but it was now secured by two pairs of watchful eyes, father and daughter, forever bound by shared blood and the unshakable knowledge of trials overcome.